And so Jim Rogers kind of interrupted our conversation and kind of bellowed down from the end of the table, Lady Thatcher, it's something about what your position on the euro. Well, Jim was not going to take the politically correct answer to anything. So he said something along the lines of, well, we've all heard that. What do you really mean? And so she turned much more slowly, looked him in the eye, and tore him to rhetorical shreds with her tongue.
From the NXT studio in Southern California, this is the Power Market Report. I'm your host, Albert Liu. My guest today is Brien Lundin. He's the president and CEO of Jefferson Financial and the publisher of Gold Newsletter. He's also the host of the New Orleans Investment Conference. Brien, thanks for joining me on the Power Market Report. How are you?
I'm doing great, Albert. Great to be with you.
It's great to have you here for the first time. Brien, I want to talk to you about your conference, the one you have at the beginning of November, because this is a conference that I love, and I've had the fortune of not only attending, but talking to David Galland about it. And there's been so many memorable moments, and I thought it'd be really fun to have you on the program just to maybe pick your brain, tell us about this conference, the history of it, and then most importantly, what are some of the most memorable things that have happened at that conference over the years?
Sure. You know, the New Orleans conference is unique in the industry. In fact, it really founded the industry. This will be our 45th anniversary this year. It was started in 1974 by Jim Blanchard as kind of the culmination of his efforts to get gold legalized in the United States again. And gold was legalized at the tail end of 1974, so Jim had his first event in the spring of 1974, essentially to teach U.S. investors how to invest in gold. And he had a huge turnout, much more than he expected that first year, and it just grew and grew. And it became kind of the cornerstone of this whole financial investment-oriented conference industry out there today. And there's a lot of events out there. There are events that have very high costs to attend and no exhibitors, no sponsors. There are conferences that are free to attend that have a lot of exhibitors. And we've had the same business model where we have a not too expensive, but a sizable cost to attend. And we do have an exhibit hall where people can find opportunities in various sectors. But over the years, what we've become known for, and it was Jim Blanchard that really started this, was kind of going over the top with our speakers. One of the distinguishing elements of the New Orleans Investment Conference is the quality, not only of our attendees, that's really the primary distinguishing factor, but also the quality of our speakers. You don't find other events out there that will spend the budget that we spend and the blood, sweat, and tears that we expend to get really unique, celebrated, insightful speakers to the event. You know, you talk about over the years, what are some of the stories? When people ask me what the most memorable event at the New Orleans conference that I ever experienced was when Margaret Thatcher spoke at our event in 1998. It was the 25th anniversary of our conference, a really big event. And because of Jim Blanchard's relationship with some of Lady Thatcher's advisors, we were able to get her to speak. This is after she was out of office. But what an incredible time that was. I had the honor of having lunch with Lady Thatcher along with Jim Blanchard and his wife Lasha and a number of other speakers at the conference at that year's event. Really some big name Wall Street types and the like. And yet, despite this really this room, this lunch table filled with all these luminaries, Lady Thatcher spent most of her time talking to my wife and I right to her left. And the reason why was because her grandkids were about the same age as our children. So we were talking about kids, young kids in particular, and family matters and family and things like that. And Lady Thatcher was so engaging and sincere talking to my wife and I about this, and we were just blown away by that. And down from the end of the table was Jim Rogers, the famed trader, and not a guy to hold his tongue in any instance or circumstance. And so Jim Rogers kind of interrupted our conversation and kind of bellowed down from the end of the table, Lady Thatcher, something about what your position on the euro and why you didn't join the euro. So Lady Thatcher was talking to us, and she looked up at the interruption, turned to Jim Rogers, and gave kind of her pat political answer on the euro. And then she turned back to us and continued her conversation talking about her grandkids. Well, Jim was not going to take the politically correct answer to anything. So he said something along the lines of, well, we've all heard that. What do you really mean? And so she turned much more slowly, looked him in the eye, and tore him to rhetorical shreds with her tongue. And looking around the table, everyone's jaws were just resting on the table, could not believe what she had just said. No one can remember what she said. It just blew everybody away. And then she calmly turned right back to my wife and I and continued her conversation as if there was no interruption whatsoever. And you can see that kind of strength of personality. I mean, for one thing, you could see her in the well of the House of Lords and taking all of the abuse and giving it right back. You can go online and you can watch video recordings of this all over the place. But to see that in action 3 feet from you was just absolutely mind-blowing. I've talked to or had the pleasure at this event over the decades that I've been involved in it to talk to a lot of celebrities and really big names of geopolitics and investments. And most of these really big names, they're your friend for an hour because you just wrote them a really big check. But Lady Thatcher was sincerely the real deal. She was just an incredible, incredible personality. And everything anybody ever says about her in that regard, her moniker of the Iron Lady was really just so well-deserved.
How would you say the conference has changed, Brien, over the decades?
Well, we've talked about this, you and I, because you're obviously in the conference business now. And the thing about these events is you have to compete with a lot of other news sources these days. Going back decades ago, we had to start competing with financial news channels, FNN to begin with, CNBC, now Fox Business and the like. And they bring in a lot of big names on a daily basis. So how can you compete with that? And really, the essential character of the New Orleans conference, and I know what you and Rick have been trying to do with the Sprott Symposium, is bringing an essential character of the event that gives an attendee much more than they can get through that flat screen in front of them, through access to the internet and websites or CNBC and the like. And that it's an interactive experience. You go there, you rub shoulders with investors who are really, by their very attendance at that event, they've demonstrated that they're the creme de la creme. They're very sophisticated, active, smart investors. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. You get a lot of information by just talking to these people, and the camaraderie and the intellectual energy is just palpable as you walk the halls. But these speakers that you hear that you may have only seen on television or on YouTube or something like that, you can actually go up and talk to them. You can have them answer your questions. You can have them say, either in person or from the stage in this intimate event, things that they would never say on television or in a more public forum. And you get insights through that you'll never get otherwise. But beyond that, you have to experience these events. You have to go there, and our best advertising is word of mouth. People saying you just have to come. Well, why? Take my word for it. You have to come. Once you do, you'll come every year that you can. And that's what happens at our event. Once they come, they understand, they get it, they appreciate the value, and they realize that they're getting value and rewards at that event by attending that they would never get otherwise.
I think one of the things that you get at a conference like that, and this is difficult to manufacture and it's difficult to predict, but my mind goes back to the story of when Dick Cheney spoke and Doug Casey was in the green room with him.
Yep.
They had a little conflict. Doug came out and talked about it on the stage. There's nowhere else in the world that you would get to experience that in person. Don't you agree?
I absolutely agree. And Doug, we've had to almost muzzle him sometimes, but he's had a habit of that by, we bring in some big names. I don't want to say we bring them in specifically to be punching bags, but sometimes they end up being punching bags. But yeah, Dick Cheney over the years, there are a few others that Doug has kind of confronted.
So he didn't agree with, so he called them out in public basically and called the audience out.
Yeah, and you want to strike fear into a conference organizer's very bones, and to see Doug Casey in a receiving line with a big name celebrity that you paid a lot of money to present at your event. But it's always fun. There's always something like that going on. Doug himself, at his presentations, he'll come off the stage, and he'll ask me, well, or later in the conference, ask me how his speech was. And I'll say, well, Doug, you really had half the people absolutely hating you, 50% right down the middle absolutely hated you, and 50% absolutely loved you. And he'll look at me and say, so a success then, huh? And I said, absolutely. That's just where Doug wants to be. He wants to go right down the middle and have half of them loving him and half of them hating him. So yeah, he's always entertaining, and we put him in those situations specifically to be entertaining.
Who's a speaker that the crowd really embraced in recent memory?
Oh, Charles Krauthammer, I think without a doubt. He spoke for, I think, 5 years running before he took ill. And he had a personality that really didn't express itself through Fox News, where most of the people saw him. He's almost like a Dr. Strangelove character from his appearance on Fox News. He didn't smile as much. He was very stiff. Completely opposite from the impression in that he gave at the New Orleans conference. He was very relaxed. He loved to come out of the green room and take pictures with the attendees and talk with them. And he was one of the funniest guys you could ever imagine. Just a wicked sense of humor. Loved to laugh with our attendees, and was really embraced by our attendees. In fact, the first year I got him to speak, he spent a lot of time out there with the attendees and talking with them. I think he did a book signing and a photographic. We had a photo opportunity for some of the attendees, et cetera. But he was so impressed by so many people coming up and telling him how great they were and how big of fans they were, that he doubled his price for the next event. And
so he's very smart too.
Reluctantly paid it. He was a smart guy, by the way, so is evidenced by this. So the next year, the same thing. Everybody told him how great he was, and his next offer was he doubled the price again. And I had to tell him, I said, Charles, I'm going to start telling people to come up here and just criticize you and tell you the worst thing ever because you keep doubling the price. I cannot afford it anymore. And he got the message, and eventually he kept his prices steady for us. We were his favorite event. And at one point he was speaking at our event for half the cost that he charged for any other event. And he didn't speak much. He wasn't really on the circuit, as it were. But he was really embraced and by our audience. And when he passed away, hundreds, really anyone who had ever seen him at our event felt a very personal loss. He had this way of making people feel as if they were friends of his after having met him only one time.
Yeah, I really got that impression last year. You did that nice tribute to him. Mm-hmm. And, one thing that I really liked about the conference was sitting in the green room, just sort of relaxing before going on stage. And I hear this voice and I think, that sounds familiar. And I look up and it's James Carville.
Yeah.
And he's cracking everyone up. He's there. I guess he was there, Fort Charles.
Yeah.
But just a really funny guy. And I think it's great in this day and age, especially, to have a place where people who disagree can go and talk it out. That's the thing that's missing with social media and all the online interaction. People go online to go to war. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's much harder to do that in person. It's much harder
Absolutely.
to be that dismissive, right?
Absolutely, it is. We our whole ethos is that ideas are not bullets. That they're because someone has a different idea or ideal from you. It's not a slap to your face. There's room for disagreement. We do like to present opposing points of view. Back in the old days, it's a grand tradition of our event. In fact, we had William F. Buckley debate McGovern in one of the really classic presentations in the New Orleans conference history. And we've continued that. Occasionally we'll have conservative, liberal, libertarian, philosophical debate. The problem with that recently is that I haven't been able to get any liberals to come because with the exception of James Carville, who at our event said famously one year, looked around the crowd and said, "I feel like the fire hydrant at a dog show." And to which Charles Krauthammer replied, "Allow me to lift my leg." So we have these kinds of interactions at our event, and it's not all in the green room. A lot of it is right out there on the stage. We like to present these kinds of lively discussions. We've had times when I have almost pulled one of our MCs, who shall remain unnamed, but whose initials are MS, where I've almost had to pull them off the stage because of the interactions that he was having with one of our panelists. So there's always something fun and funny happening at the New Orleans conference.
So what can we expect this year? November 1st, I believe, is the date.
Well, I think this is going to be one of the most rewarding years in our history because it seems like, one of our focuses obviously over the years has been precious metals and mining stocks and resources in general. And I think that our attendees started to see the end of this bear market last year. And I think that this is kind of confirming the end of it. We're going to have a nice rise, if not a full-fledged bull market. If not this year, then beginning over the next couple of years. So I think it's going to be very rewarding in that we're going to have a lot of opportunities at our event in metals and mining. But one of the things I'm doing this year is also focusing on some other, what I call irreversible trends, big picture trends that we're going to focus on this year. We all know that, for example, that cannabis has been a big winner for a lot of people, a very lively and active speculative market. So we're addressing that in full force this year. We have a few speakers dedicating their presentations to the cannabis market, a panel that's going to cover it to some extent, and a number of companies in the exhibit hall, I believe, that are going to be focused on that. Now, that is an area, obviously, as well as I do, it's very speculative. It's in a boom phase. So at some point, there's going to be a big shakeout. And that's one of the things we're going to explore is what are the pitfalls and how to avoid it, how to get in early in the right kinds of companies, how to take money off the table when you need to. So we've got the people speaking, Nick Hodge, Sean Broderick, Matt Carr from the Oxford Club are all going to address this. Another thing we're talking about is literally the next big things. We're looking at artificial intelligence. We're looking at the electrification of transportation, energy, metals. What are these big trends that are irreversible at this point, and how can you profit from that? We've got Ross Gerber, who's a noted technology financier, presenting. We've got Simon Moores, who's probably the leading expert in the world on the energy metals and other strategic metals. We're talking about real estate. We have Chris Martinson and Adam Taggart of the Peak Prosperity team. We're going to talk about energy, the environment, and the economy, the way they do like no one else can. On the geopolitical end, we're famous for that, for addressing geopolitics and economics before we drill down into the specific sectors. We're going to have Stephen Moore, who was briefly nominated for the Federal Reserve before he got kind of shouted down by the intelligentsia for being too free market oriented. We have political commentator Kevin Williamson, who is one of the most controversial observers of the political scene out there. I think he's going to have a lively exchange with Doug Casey this year on our geopolitical panel, as well as in his presentation. We have Doug Casey, of course. We have Danielle DiMartino Booth. We have Peter Bookvar, who's kind of the resident contrarian on CNBC. Mike Larson, Robert Prechter. We have Rick Rule, of course, is one of our featured presenters again this year, as always. And so it's a great lineup this year. We have Peter Schiff, we have Adrian Day, Byron King, Gwen Preston, Brent Cook, goes on and on. Dozens and dozens of the top experts out there in their specific sectors, all in one place. And again, with a crowd of attendees that themselves are leading experts in, or really highly successful investors that we can all learn from.
Rick always likes to say that all of the knowledge is not coming from the stage or the podium, but oftentimes it's to your left and to your right. And my personal experience has been exactly that. Not only is the camaraderie great, but there's a wealth of opportunity there as well to learn, and also career opportunities and other things I've found just by attending these conferences. So November 1st through 4th in New Orleans. We always have a good time in New Orleans, Brien. And last year, your staff sent out a list of the restaurants and bars that you like to frequent. I actually really enjoyed that, to the insider's perspective on New Orleans. The website is neworleansconference.com. Please go check that out. And Brien, I can't let you go without mentioning to the viewers that you're going to be in Vancouver with me and Rick, July 30th to August 2nd. That information is at sprottconference.com. Looking forward to seeing you there as well, Brien. Any last thoughts for the viewers?
Yes, please come see me at the Sprott Symposium. I'll be there. I'll have a lot of time to talk with people. It's, as you know, the Sprott event probably focuses on it really does focus more on the individual companies, publicly traded resource companies, than our event. And it's a great mix. Rick and I kid each other about which is the best conference anyone can attend. But our event and the Sprott event are really 1 and 2 or 1 and 1A. If you're a serious investor, you really have to be there. Both of these events pay for themselves many times over. They're well worth it, very enjoyable, and again, the rewards that you get from them cannot always be quantified in profit and loss, but almost assuredly can be quantified in terms of profit and loss. You will make much more back than you spend to attend these events, especially in this environment that we're in right now.
Absolutely. Information at sprottconference.com. Brien, thanks for coming on the Powered Market Report. It's great talking to you, and let's do it again soon.
I would love to, Albert. Thanks so much.